Hello, in this video I'm going to explain how we can use Camera Raw's new range masking controls to make a series of really precise local adjustments to enhance an image. You can see this is my starting image here. So the sky's looking a little bit blown out, and we can make a few simple local adjustments to really improve our image by enhancing that sky and pulling out some detail in the rocks. So let's get cracking here. I'm going to open up my starting image here into Adobe Camera Raw. So I can right click it here in Bridge and choose Open in Camera Raw. Now we can begin here by darkening the sky, and a great tool for this is the graduated filter. So we can grab that from the toolbar up here, and we can hit the minus icon over to the right here next to these different sliders to dial in a setting for our tool. So I can dial in some negative exposure here, and then I can drag in from the top right corner here to darken down that portion of the sky. So I'll bring it to around about there, I think. And I could also perhaps knock back the highlights just to darken that area even more, like this. And let's just tweak the blend of tones here like this. So you can see how we're able to start darkening that area down. And I'm happy with that. But the problem here is our adjustment is leaking into our foreground detail here. Now, to control what's affected and what remains unaffected, we can use range masking. So if we go down to the settings here at the bottom, we can set the range mask here to either color or luminance. So let's start off here with color. Now when we select color, you can see we get an eyedropper tool here and also a color range slider. We start off by using the eyedropper tool to target colors within our image here. So I can click over the blue sky and notice how now the blues are going to be targeted and the rocks are now excluded from the adjustment. And in fact, just to show you how this works, I'm going to undo that, and this time I'm going to turn the mask overlay on. So you can see without any of those color points added, you can see now how our adjustment is seeping into the rocks. But if we use the eyedropper and click over the blue sky, now you can see those rocks are unaffected by the local adjustment that we've made. And it's quite useful to use this overlay when you're judging the range masking controls. You can hit Y to toggle it off and on. Now we can add further points here by holding Shift, and you can see this allows us to add more colors into the mix. So I can just continue shift clicking around the image to add different colors like this. And we can also drag to sample from a wider selection of colors like this. Now let's take a quick look down here at the color range slider. Let's just zoom in a little closer on our selected area here. And if I drag the color range slider to the right here, you can see that the command includes a wider range of colors. So we're effectively including more blue tones in the mix. If we drag it to the left, you can see the command only targets a much narrower range of blue tones. So now you can see we start to actually get this kind of breakup effect in the cloud. So we can just use the color range slider here to fine tune how the area is affected. Now let's zoom out a little, and I'm going to go back to my basic panel here, and I'm just going to adjust the exposure. We're just going to knock it down a little bit here because I think the overall image is slightly overexposed. I could also perhaps knock the highlights down a touch like this, and let's add a touch of clarity and also perhaps a touch of vibrance. So now our image is starting to come to life, and we've got that lovely balance in the sky now by using our local adjustment tool. But I'm finding the darker areas here in the rocks are becoming slightly too dark, so what I'd like to do is pull a little bit of detail out in that area. Now I could use the shadow slider here for this in the basic panel. You can see that lifts those darker areas, but it's also affecting everything else in the image, and it's giving us that kind of over processed look. So I'm going to double click to reset that. Instead I'm going to make another local adjustment. This time I'll use the adjustment brush, and I'm going to go to my adjustment brush tonal settings here, and I'm going to click the plus icon next to exposure this time to dial in some positive exposure, and let's perhaps bring it up slightly more, and then I'm going to click paint over this area here. So now I'm able to lift this portion of the image. In fact, let's just make it slightly brighter still. So now you can see I've lightened those darker patches of the rock, but of course I'm also lightening everything else. Now this time we can use range masking in a different way to target a portion of the tonal range. So I can go down here to the range mask settings again, and this time we'll use the luminance setting. Let's zoom in a little bit closer to that area there. So again, we can hit Y to show which areas are affected or unaffected. So those pink areas are affected by that change in exposure. Now we can use the luminance range slider here to target a specific portion of the tonal range. And in this case, I want to target the darker tone. So what I can do is drag this right point here towards the left. And you can see as I drag, we start to exclude the lighter portion of the tonal range, which is this portion here, from our adjustment. So now we're only affecting those darker tones with our shift in exposure. So you can see how we can use this luminance range slider to control which pixels are affected based on their brightness. Similarly, if we choose a very bright range, you can see now the darker tones are unaffected. So let's target those darker tones like this, and similarly with the color range slider before, we can use the smoothness slider to control the transition of the effect. If we use a high smoothness, we get a smoother transition between the parts of the range that are affected and the rest. If we use a low smoothness, you can see now we get a harsher transition between the affected tones and elsewhere. So we can just tweak the smoothness until we're happy. Again, we can hit Y to show our mask overlay and tweak the smoothness like this, and I'm happy with that. And if we just zoom out and toggle on the before and after of our image here, you can see the difference a few selective adjustments can make. So there we are, that's how to use range masking in Camera Raw, and you'll also find near identical controls in Lightroom. That's how to use it to make precise tonal adjustments that target either specific colors or tones within your images.